Well, hello, my friends, and welcome back to How to Eat an Elephant. I am your host, Ian Andrews, joined by my wife and my sister, Emily and Megan, respectively. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
It's a little
Great.
chilly here in my home.
It is
A
chilly.
little sniffly.
We have been waking up and it has been freezing in our house and it remains freezing all day. Even though it gets up to like 77 degrees during the daytime, it's freezing in our house all day because it I don't know, it like holds all the
Yeah,
cool
my house
air
does
from
that
the
too.
nighttime. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this morning I basically had a small temper tantrum and was like,
Yeah.
I have had
Can
enough.
confirm.
Made Ian turn on the heat. So now our furnace is on. But like, don't you guys feel like it's a competition every year? That
Oh,
like
yeah.
people are like, well, I haven't turned on my heat yet. Or like,
Yeah.
it's like the day before Christmas and they're like, well, I just turned on my heat.
The day before Christmas. And you look at them like, you've been miserable for months and you chose this?
So
Yeah.
we work from home and we are always in our home. So
Yeah.
it's a little extra money on the bill, but the happiness is worth it.
I had a college professor who had class at her home one time, and we were supposed to it was like a tea party at her house, which was glorious. I mean, I'm not going to complain. It was awesome. But she was one of those who wants to see how far she can go. And it was the dead
on
of
a
January. And it was about 50 degrees inside her house. And she had, I mean, you could hardly see her. There were so many layers. It was her tiny little face peeking out from a pile of blankets and, 16 pairs of socks. And she was holding her teacup and said, welcome, welcome. The tea is freezing before it ever reaches your mouth. The whole house was like an ice box.
It must be. I don't know. It's like a northern regions thing.
It must be. Well, I couldn't do it. I cry uncle very early. My heat is already on.
Well, so is ours now, and I can literally feel the room becoming more hospitable and livable by
It's
the
so
moment.
much better already. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Well, with that, I suppose let's jump into a very appropriate section of the novel where
Wow.
we find Fantine in winter, and it's going to be brutal.
What a
So
transition.
brace yourselves.
That's dark.
Yeah, it's very dark. It's very dark. We
all
course
have
in
our
book
incisor
5.
teeth though still, so it's okay.
Ooh, ugh, that was rough.
I
The
know.
whole thing was rough. Although it continues to be long passages of philosophical meditation and then really quick hitting plot moments. I mean, he didn't seem to dwell much, frankly, on the pulling of Fantine's teeth, for example, in a way that the films kind of do. And maybe that's just a difference between the mediums. But anyways, our section for the day opens in book 5. Book 5 is called The Descent for some obvious reasons. And
subtlety,
I think it's
not one of his things.
No, not so much subtle.
It's interesting though, because it is obviously it's the fall of Fantine deeper and deeper, but it doesn't end like at the very, very bottom. She finds not like blackness or darkness. I don't know. Just the shape of it isn't necessarily what I would call a complete descent. She does seem to rise in a way at the end.
Sort
That'll
of,
be
yeah.
fun to talk
But
about. I
that's
love
like
that.
maybe a philosophical discussion about what a descent is.
Huh.
That's very Dantean of you. All about inversion. Going down is going up, something like that. Let's get into
something like that.
Let's get into it. So Hugo starts by saying, here's a history of the improvement of making jet beads. I think
all of my Tolstoy alarms went off in reading that title. I was like, no.
Oh no. We're going to get a lot of that, I understand. Eventually it's going to be about sewers, the sewer system of Paris. So settle in for that sort of thing. But really what this is an encapsulation of Jean Valjean remaking his life. Now, this could be called a spoiler, except it's not a spoiler. As we said, subtlety is not so much Victor Hugo's bag. Right, Emily?
Well, and he does, for those who are following along, he does reveal that at the end of our section for today. So it's kind of a mystery at the beginning who Monsieur Madeleine is, but not so much at the end. And, not so much throughout. He's pretty much showing his hand.
I think he's showing his hand because of, and maybe this is just the way that I read it, but because of how similar his actions are to that big long passage on the Bishop of Digne at the beginning. The things that he chooses to do, his interests, the way that he spends his money, his heart for the poor, all of that seems to be directly patterned after this previous character. And the fact that we also hear he came into town, no one knew where he came from, and they didn't ask for his papers seems to be kind of, full send. Yeah.
Suspicious.
Well, and the reason that no one asked for his papers is that he comes into town on an evening where there has been a house fire.
Yeah, this was cool.
Recklessly endangers his own life to save 2 children who just happen to be the children of the current police chief in the town. So that sort of gets him off scot-free. He's clearly a good person, having done this selfless act, and so he's in from that point on.
And there's a flavor of
No, please.
There's a flavor of providence about that it just so happens to be, the captain of the guard or whatever, who's now on Jean Valjean's side. Right. Now he's safe from the law for a while,
That's super interesting that providence can be in something like a house fire. That might be important for the rest of the novel as well.
Oh, yeah.
I had a thought while I was reading this, though, because we have to get to a place knowing the whole scope of the story, right? I haven't read this before, but we're all aware of various adaptations. He's got to be rich. Important detail, because more or less he has to be able to live a life where he doesn't really worry about money so much in order to be the Valjean that we are going to meet here in a couple of chapters, on the run from the law, et cetera, et cetera. And so what Hugo bakes in is he actually had a brilliant idea that revolutionized trade in the country of France, right?
I kind of took it as a comment on, we've talked a couple times about how the preface to the novel says something like ignorance is one of the evils of the century. And once Jean Valjean is free from the oppression of society, he can think. His mind has been freed, and it says, thus we have 3 results from one idea, right? He improves the economy, he improves the lives of workers, and it's a gain for the manufacturer. So much good comes out of his ability to think freely without the oppression of his jailers, whatever. He can fully rise to his true potential.
Right. And he spends a lot of time reading, too, in order to aid this process, right? I mean, basically, his only comforts are giving away his vast wealth and reading books.
Yeah, Hugo isn't subtle about that either.
No,
because
no.
Madeleine likes reading books, and Javert hates reading books, but does so anyway. Like, there's clearly like a underlying thread of conversation about education and such things.
Well, and he continues his meditation on justice from the early stages of the book. Remember, he talks about law and basically paints it as an impersonal killing force that is, as rather than benefiting the society, is keeping the oppressed down and maintaining the position of the rich and uncaring and all of that. I mean, the Bishop of Digne's whole perspective on life is grace and mercy over justice. Right? God is more than just. And so in this portrayal of Javert, we get a man who is defined by his dedication to the law, to justice, and as a result is described as an animal. Did you guys notice that? He's described as an animal, a wolf.
But then also there's a comparison there as well. I think obviously there's supposed to be literary foils, right? A comparison between Jean Valjean and Javert. But we're told actually that Madeleine / Valjean had almost memorized the natural law. So they're both dedicated to law in some ways. I would be interested how you guys would differentiate those 2 different kinds of dedication to the law.
Yeah, I have an idea about that, but Megan, you look like you have something to say. Go ahead.
Well, I had a couple somethings, but we're flying past them. So maybe we're not to the point where we're diving deep yet. We're given an overview. Here are all the big ideas we're going to be talking about.
Well, I just want to kind of let this conversation, fly as we see fit. So
okay, well then I have to back us up, because when you were talking about Jean Valjean having an education now because of his wealth and because of the ability to read books, I was actually put in mind of him being freed up to use what education he had from experience as a poor person.
Right.
That's something that's being set free also.
No kidding.
When he finally, when he has enough money to not think about that anymore, now he's sharing his experience as a peasant with how to make your farm successful. And he's actually, all of his innate abilities, regardless of his station and his education, are also being freed in this
that's good.
chapter, which
So
I think
it's
was
not like
inspiring.
a formal education. It's his, even as a lower class member of society, he had something valuable to contribute.
Yeah, and it's being honored.
That's a good way to put that. One of the things you can hear Hugo meditating on is the idea that he gave us initially, that there are no bad men, there are just bad situations. That might be an overstatement of his idea, but he's definitely messing around with that notion. And so we see now that Valjean has been freed from the overwhelming, crushing weight of a society that's decided to dismiss him, his natural state is coming forward, which is to contemplate and to give and to love and to forgive and all of that.
Which I think maybe ties into that conversation about the natural law that he's almost memorized, this emphasis on something being innate and born to you as a human being and part of the natural way of things. Even his natural analogies that he uses from his time as a peasant they have something to say about humanity. I'm thinking of that moment when he's talking about the nettle and how they can use all the parts of the nettle, which is a noxious weed, to help the animals and also maybe be food. I can't remember what he said they would use it for. But he says, if we took a little time, the nettle would be useful. We neglect it and it becomes harmful. Then we kill it. Men are so like the nettle. That seems to be his takeaway from the natural order. If we watch the way that things are in the natural world, then compassion and grace and cultivating the good, even in a disgusting thing, should be our takeaway. And Javert does not agree with that. So maybe that's leading us towards a conversation about justice.
Yeah, I think so too. Comparing these two characters, to me, obviously has to be done with their position toward the law. And it occurs to me that you're right. Valjean does think about the law. He has memorized the natural law. But he's free in a way that Javert isn't, because the law has already condemned him and he's already been found forgiven, right?
He knows the need for someone to take a little time with him as a nettle in society.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas Javert actually
doesn't see himself
as
a nettle.
as just. He's just. Yeah. He's on the right side of the law, which, as it turns out, is an unbearable weight.
Well, and to continue Megan's comparison with the natural order, it strikes me that while Valjean looks to organic things about him, Javert places his hope in what's artificial. His vision of the law is based in societal structures and their aristocracy. And he basically looks at that one aristocrat and says, well, he owns the nicest house in town, so clearly he must be good. So he isn't actually, it's not the natural law per se that Javert is dedicated to, but something that's been constructed or manufactured.
Yeah. Hugo says that he bases his identity on a powerful foundation of rectitude, order, and honesty. But even that, a foundation, like an edifice, like he's built something.
With his own hands, yeah.
Speaking of Javert.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the more I chew on it, I mean, the opening line that we're given after the description of the wolf, right? So the legend is that there's a wolf mother kills one of her brood every time she has pups, because one of them has this feral desire to kill all of its brothers and sisters. And that one wolf that should have been killed at birth is Javert. A touch on the nose, but it's because he was born in prison, right? So we have Valjean, who was born free, if poor, and spent his adolescence selflessly caring for his sister and her children until misfortune strikes, and then he ends up, on the prison barges forever and all of that. We have Javert, on the other hand, who was born into prison through no fault of his own. And so he's not only just with regard to the law, but also sees himself as rising up from circumstances that were not his fault, that were none of his own doing. So there's a little bit of of injustice present in Javert's background too.
And that's just symbolically significant, right? Born into slavery, born into bondage, as opposed to born free. That has biblical connotations.
Absolutely.
Isn't there a section where Hugo, as narrator, kind of steps back and says, some people from some literary schools might look at Javert as like a symbol.
Oh, you don't say.
I'm just trying to reconcile the idea of Javert like that wolf pup who's going to devour his siblings with this line. Some police officers have a peculiar expression, combining an air of meanness with an air of authority. Javert had this without the meanness. Does mean, what instance of the word mean are we using here? Mean as in low class, or mean
That's
as in
sort
cruel?
of that's how I took it, was the low class, the averageness of it.
Or is it the pettiness? Because he does end up turning himself in when he breaks his own law, which is the end of our section. So I wonder if it has to do with some people would carry their authority with a desire to place themselves above everyone else. And his is actually dedication to his vision of justice. And he's willing to have that govern over himself as well as over everyone else.
I like that. That's better than what I was thinking.
That's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just rankling. I needed a moment.
He's not, though. I don't know, man. Hugo does seem to be telegraphing his point just a hair. I mean, this man was a compound of two sentiments, simple and good in themselves, but he made them almost evil by his exaggeration of them. Respect for authority and hatred of rebellion. So he's unfeeling. I mean, he's the human embodiment of the legal code of his era, more or less.
Yeah. Yep, I think that's exactly right.
I loved this line a little further down that same passage you were reading, Ian. His conscience was bound up in his usefulness, his religion in his duties, and he was a spy as others are priests. That idea of him being a spy comes up again at the end of our section, and he's saying it in a confessional kind of way, like, take me to task for this. I've been looking out to attack my brother, basically. And I slandered you in the process, and the law judges me too. That absoluteness in his character, I think, is going to be crucial to our understanding of his motivation.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I think, again, it's not particularly subtle. I don't know that bothers me really, but it just isn't. It just isn't very subtle. I mean, you've got Valjean on the one hand, he who has been forgiven much knows how to forgive. And we've got Javert on the other, the inflexible standard.
I will say this, though. I think that right now in this section, as Madeleine, and also Valjean, but like more particularly, Madeleine is standing in as kind of like the merciful figure, but it's not a complete portrait of Valjean, because I think actually Valjean shares some of the basic assumptions that Javert and Fantine, which we'll get to, have about their position towards the law. And he's not functioning for other people. He's functioning as more than just, but maybe towards himself, not so much. And that's something that was seeded early on, and we're going to see that grow. But I think there's an assumption that what would it be, that one must use the code of law in order to rectify oneself,
to justify,
even though like people are looking for mercy and kindness, they keep turning to what is just in order to try to wrench that from it, like they're expecting that if they just do it right. I don't know, I'm trying to articulate.
Do you see that in Madeleine here as well?
Not so much in this section, but I do. Ian was saying that it's pretty straightforward, and in this section, I think it is. But I do think there's that aspect of his character that the conversation that's taking place here is seeding the pot for an aspect of Valjean's character that's going to come to light and unfold over the course of the story.
Yeah, maybe so. And maybe that pokes its head up a little bit in the fact that he refuses all honors and distinctions multiple times before he finally accepts his post as the mayor of the town.
That's a good example. Yeah.
It's interesting to me how Hugo has a conversation about the way that all the people in the town look at him. And on the one hand, they are showering him with honors and recommending him as mayor and giving him medals and things like that. On the other hand, they're all constantly trying to make sense of his motivations, assuming that they're dark ones, right? Oh, he must be greedy. He's looking to make a lot of money. And then when he gives all of the money away, they're like, oh, well, then he must be ambitious, right? Because it's inconceivable that a man would act the way he is acting from pure motives. There's no way that's true. And eventually everyone is forced to acknowledge, because of his actions, that he is good and everybody loves him for it. But it takes a minute. So that's interesting.
Interesting that it turns on a woman saying to him, a good mayor is a good thing. Are you afraid of the good you might do?
Right.
The concept is clear, but the use of the word good 3 times in 2 sentences, I think, is intentional. Good, right, righteous. Are you good? Is this part of your qualification according to the law? He shies away from that title. And he's called to task for it because his position allows him to be used to bless people, and he wants to do that. But the title doesn't fit.
Not from his perspective, anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
he
that's what I was
refuses
gonna
it 3
say.
times.
That he's so fixated on his own guilty past, maybe.
Well, yeah, he's preoccupied. That's the other thing that we're told over and over again. He's preoccupied.
Which makes that scene where there's, the man is pinned under his cart. Fauchelevent is pinned under his cart, and Javert is standing there, and he says, there's only one man who I know could lift this cart. And there's an unspoken conversation between them. It's, if you do this, I'll know who you are. Is kind of how I read it. And Jean Valjean is terrified, and he does it anyway, but he's admitting that he's a convict. He's admitting his seedy past that he's always thinking about.
Which is it's a great literary device, but what? Javert, are we supposed to think that you have met all of the men in France? And you know for sure that only one man in the entire country could possibly lift a load this big. This is ridiculous.
I know. I see that. It is a hyperbolic, exaggerated, romantic kind of scene. But at the same time, if Javert was already suspicious of Father Madeleine, then this kind of confirms a suspicion. Rather than, of all the men in the world, you, a total stranger who I don't recognize from anywhere, must be this other guy.
Right.
I mean, it's a powerful scene. There's a reason all the adaptations include it. But I was struck by the fact that in all the adaptations I've seen, it's like Valjean lifts the cart and then Javert recognizes. But in the book, the recognition happens beforehand, and Valjean does it knowing that the consequence is going to be that Javert knows.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, man, this is fun. I didn't notice this while I was reading, but if that's true, then this perspective of the community as Father Madeleine, as a representation of the good Lord, comes directly in conflict with his humanity and the thing he's afraid of and his guilty past. Those 2 things come into tension at the end of the chapter 6. The old man kisses his knees and calls him the good Lord.
Yeah.
Madeleine himself looks at Javert with a tranquil air of suffering.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
That's a tight scene.
Yeah. That's what I was rambling towards earlier. I think that the people have their eyes on Madeleine, but Madeleine has his eyes on Javert.
Yeah.
On the
law. Yeah.
Yeah. So the people are our link to the next section, because we get introduced to Fantine and get an update, pretty dark update on her life at times. And he starts by meditating on the fact that a community full of people are constantly watching and evaluating and feeding their desire for gossip. And Fantine is one of the people they're looking at. And it's interesting to me to note that she's very similar to Valjean in this way. She's doing something essentially noble by trying to provide for her daughter. She's exulting in supporting herself by working hard. And she's finally found a job, and everything is going just swimmingly. And what is going to tear her down is literally public opinion. That's actually what's going to destroy her life. And the way he frames it is this: some people are malicious from the mere necessity of talking. Their conversation, chatter in the drawing room, gossip in the antechamber is like those fireplaces that rapidly burn up wood. They need a great deal of fuel. The fuel is their neighbor. So Fantine was watched.
They actually, Hugo uses the same word to describe them, pure instinct. Let's see, page 177. And often when these secrets are made known, these mysteries published, these enigmas brought into the light of day, they lead to catastrophes, duels, failures, the ruin of families, and make lives miserable, to the great joy of those who have discovered all without any ulterior motive, from pure instinct. That's the same language he used to describe Javert in his digging into justice.
And the connection to a beast, right? This is the part of you that's beast-like and animalistic rather than what makes you most human.
Yep.
So we don't need to dwell on it really, because he's a chap of one idea through the Fantine section, but it starts with her losing her job to a busybody, right? Who says she's got a child somewhere and she's unmarried, and society frowns on such things. And so we're going to get her fired. So she gets fired and she starts sewing for the soldiers, making them coarse shirts, as he puts it. And so she does the coarse shirts thing for a little while. But then
the coarse shirts thing.
Thénardiers start amping up their requests for cash, because as far as they're concerned, she's a cash cow and her job is to pay them whatever they want. So as the demands for money get steeper and steeper, she's driven to do things like, first of all, sell her hair. So there is one aspect of her personal identity that's taken away. And then eventually her teeth. There's another aspect of her identity that's taken away.
Who has stress dreams about losing their teeth. I hated that scene.
Yeah. I hated the whole thing too. It's brutal. And finally, the last thing that she is driven to do is prostitute herself for extra money. Through all of this, however, she blames Father Madeleine.
Yeah, and I just found a little passage I was looking for. She blames Father Madeleine through all of this more and more, the more her suffering increases. And that's described as something of the wild beast developing in her. So she becomes obsessed with how she doesn't deserve this that has happened to her. Justice again turned on its head, and she is truly victimized, but that's what she thinks of, and she puts the blame on Father Madeleine and kind of lives for that feeling of indignance, I guess, for lack of a better word.
That's a change, though, from her first response when she's first thrown out. It says the mayor had given her 50 francs because he was kind, and he had sent her away because he was just. She had bowed to that decree. So her first response is to say, this is right. You're right to throw me out. It's wrong that I had a child. You're just doing the best you can. And then she gets bitter and starts blaming him. But I think it's interesting that it's bookended between two scenes in which it seems like she's covering over the fact that actually she blames herself.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like that too.
Well, he goes to preaching in subdivision 11, Christus nos liberavit.
It actually, I think that actually helps.
It does.
How difficult these scenes are.
It does.
Then he just goes to preaching the gospel.
He just goes to preaching, man. He says, what is this story of Fantine about? It's about society buying a slave. From whom? From misery. From hunger, from cold, from loneliness, from desertion, from privation. Melancholy barter. A soul for a piece of bread. Misery makes the offer. Society accepts. The holy law of Jesus Christ governs our civilization, but it does not yet permeate it. They say that slavery has disappeared from European civilization. That is incorrect. It still exists, but now it weighs only on women, and it is called prostitution. Oof.
But then at the end, he says, alas, what are all these destinies driven helter-skelter? Where do they go? Why are they all what they are? He who knows that sees all darkness. He who knows that sees all darkness actually
He who
don't
knows
understand.
that
He who knows
sees all
that
darkness.
Oh.
sees all darkness.
That
He is
really helpful,
alone.
actually. I
There
could
it
not
is.
His
figure out
name
that.
is God.
Yeah.
I had to read it so many times,
His
Emily,
name is
in the
God.
quiet of my mind. Please don't be embarrassed about that.
Okay, wait. So let's try again.
Yeah.
He who knows that sees all darkness. He is alone. His name is God. Okay,
Mm.
that's very helpful. But the sense was obvious. It's very encouraging.
It is encouraging because we all stand with the author in his questions, right? What are these destinies? Where do these people go? Why are they what they are? How could something like this happen to Fantine? We're with her. Like, this is horrifying. How could this happen? And what Hugo offers us is there's only one being who could offer an explanation.
Mhm.
And it's God, but what he sees is darkness. He's
Yep.
in the darkness with you, which brings me back to what you were saying about the name of the chapter,
Yep.
Descent.
That's what I
If
was
God
thinking.
really is in the darkness, then maybe she's not as alone as we see.
Yep. When you get all the way down to the bottom, you don't find, I don't know, whatever you were expecting to find. It doesn't continue on forever.
Right.
You actually do come up against God, according to Hugo,
Hmm.
which
Which
is the direction of our chapter.
Yep, that's where we go next.
So our next chapter, the idleness of M. Bama to Boss. Bama to Boss. I think what I've decided to do is spend the rest of this novel aggressively Americanizing every name. I just think it's so much better when you do it that way. The idleness of M. Bama de Bois.
Yeah, I do think that word's fun to say if you say it right, though. Bamatabois.
Bamatabois.
Yeah, Monsieur Bamatabois.
Yeah. Well, it's a silly name for a silly man, but he is sort of the bottom of the pit, right? And if we're to take the juxtaposition of this chapter with the previous line, he is alone, his name is God.
Mm-hmm.
He is God, right? He's the activity of the divine grabbing Fantine at her lowest and drawing her upwards, which is a weird thing to have to think about, the presence of suffering as providence. But we've been orbiting it. There have been moments that we've pointed to that say just that. And I think this is another one. On the one hand, it is a scurrilous injustice, what goes on with Fantine in this chapter. On the other hand, it is the reason she's brought to Père Madeleine's attention. And the result of it is that she's cared for finally. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, but the whole scene is super interesting when she's taken in by Javert and Monsieur Madeleine hears how he was involved in her story and says she must go free. She is unwilling to hear that from him because she hates him so much. She's so bitter at what he did that she turns back to Javert and tries to get her mercy from him. On her own terms, or on the terms of what she perceives as the law. She says, she says to Madeleine, "You came here to scare me, but I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of Monsieur Javert. I'm afraid of my good Monsieur Javert." And she says, "Now you see, Monsieur Inspector, you have to be just. I know you're just, Monsieur Inspector. In fact, it's all very simple. She goes on, you don't need to read this whole thing, but she basically says, I know that I deserve what you've done to me. But look at this situation that I'm in.
Right.
You have to be just to my child. I understand that you have to be just to me, but really what justice is would be letting me go take care of my child, even though I deserve everything that you're doing to me."
She tries to have it both ways. She tries to say, I agree with you. I am in the wrong. And also, I'm not in the wrong. How dare you? She tries to say both of those things. Meanwhile, Mercy is standing in the corner. And what Mercy would require is a real relinquishing of all of her words about this.
Well, what it is a relinquishing of her intentions. The line that stuck out to me was, "You see, I never meant to do wrong, truly, Monsieur Javert, and everywhere I see women much worse than me who are much more fortunate."
It's relinquishing of her right to judge her own situation.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys, what did you think, just as we're going by it, what did you think of the line, she would have softened a heart of granite, but you cannot soften a heart of wood?
Yeah.
I know. I was trying to, because the scripture is, I've replaced your heart of stone with a heart of flesh, right?
Yeah, and that line comes up in conjunction with her grief making her beautiful again. So have compassion for the suffering and let it call out the humanity in you. How is wood better than granite? Neither of those are a human heart still.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that image is supposed to be doing.
I wonder if it's idiomatic, if it doesn't translate into English very well.
Those French with their idioms.
Yeah, French in their idioms.
Well, something French in there with the wood. I don't know.
But so what all this leads to, I mean, we're concerned for Fantine, right? But what this really does is set up the first what I anticipate will be many conversations between Javert and Valjean on the topic of justice and mercy, right? Hugo's been having this conversation with himself at the reader for some time now. But here goes Javert and Valjean attempting to actually communicate with one another on this topic.
Is showing.
What'd you say? Oh, my impatience is showing.
showing.
Well, I just think it's interesting when he goes to clothing these ideas in flesh, right? That's the whole purpose of a work of literature, is to incarnate an idea by making it a person. And so we have justice in Javert, who cannot possibly understand why the mayor would let Fantine off the hook. Mm-hmm. And he takes it as a personal affront. Mm-hmm. He more or less says, hang on just a second. If you show mercy, then the foundations of my whole life are shaken and challenged. And I think that's really interesting. I beg Monsieur le Maire's pardon. The insult does not belong to him, but to justice. Mm. And Valjean responds, the highest justice is conscience.
Yeah.
What do we think about that? Is that true?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what that means. I can see where he's leading us to. Conscience, the purpose of the law is to convict the individual heart of the man looking at the law. So, you know, a little bit, who are you to throw the first stone?
Yeah.
A little bit of that.
What about the distinction, though, between the laws of man and the natural law? Mm. I mean, it occurs to me that one of the things he's doing, he's not saying laws are bad. He never says that. What he's saying is society's laws are unfeeling and untempered with mercy and kindness. They're rigid. But the natural law, which is where we would get the conscience, is something that comes from God. And it's inscrutable, certainly, because God is inscrutable.
It has nuance and
cannot
subtlety.
Scrut him.
You can't screw him.
You can't screw God. It's inscrutable, but it does, like you said, have nuance. It's tempered with mercy. There's kindness in it. I wonder if that's the real conflict here, not between law and not law, but instead between natural law and human law.
And yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I also like what you said in passing about Javert being concerned with this, because it would throw all of his beliefs out the window. He'd have to start over with the way that he is living his life. Mm-hmm. Emily, you drew a connection between Fantine's response to Monsieur le Maire and Javert's response. And on the very next page after Javert says, this is an offense of justice, Fantine turns to Monsieur Madeleine, who's leading her out into freedom. And she says, had she been deceived, would she have to change all her beliefs? Had she been deceived about who she should trust and rely on and throw herself towards? And would she have to change all her beliefs? I think the answer is yes.
It's a mirror image of what happens to Valjean with the Bishop of Digne. Mm. Right? There's a line very similar to that, where he realizes this mercy that's just been showed to me changes everything. Mm-hmm. If I let it, my options are to turn away from it or to turn towards it.
That reminds me of I'll have to go now. What the Bishop of Digne says is, go now and live as an honest man. And he takes that up as the cry of his life. And he says, you can work in the place that I've created for you to work. The women can work over here. The men can work over here. All that I ask is that you be an honest person.
Yep.
And maybe it all comes down to honesty, at which point, what does he mean by that? Telling the truth about yourself, telling the truth about how you stand in relation to the law.
In that sense, Valjean is not entirely being honest. If he's taken honesty to mean virtue, it sounds like you're saying, whereas, he's lying about his name.
Yes.
Who he is. So
on the other hand, I do think it's interesting that his lie is one of omission, because he actually is named by the people in the town. And all of the honors are things that he doesn't struggle to achieve, but are given to him and forced on him at the end of the day, right? So I don't know. That's interesting. Is it still a lie? Maybe.
Well, I think maybe by the end of our section for today, it does kind of come to the surface, as Javert comes to him and says, I'm so sorry that I sent off this report to Paris about you. I told them that you were Jean Valjean. I see now that I'm wrong. We found this other man who's going by the name Jean Matthew. I don't know how you say that. But basically Valjean just stands there and asks him questions about it, but doesn't ever, volunteer. The lie of omission begins to take on some serious consequences at this point. But to go back to the conversation about Javert and his idea having to relinquish your beliefs, I wonder if that's why in that conversation that I'm referring to at the end, he says, Monsieur Mayor, I come to ask you to be so kind as to make charges and procure my dismissal. That the kind thing to do for Javert would be to be cruel or to be harsh towards him, exacting in the face of the law, and that it would be unkind to him to forgive him.
Because he would have to throw his ideas about reality up in the air.
Yeah, it would ruin everything he's built his life on. He says at one point, good God, it is easy to be kind. The difficulty is to be just.
Right.
That it's easy to be merciful. What's really required of us and what's really difficult is to show justice.
Right.
And I don't know, the fact that he does turn it back on himself does say something for him, right? He really is living in its entirety his belief. Yeah. He's honest, yeah.
Yeah, he says, I ought to treat myself as I would treat anybody else.
Soullessly.
Cruelly. Yeah.
Except for, yeah, he is consistent, except for the fact that in Fantine's case, he is only judging her based on half the evidence, right? That he only saw
that does seem to be a whole
half of it. Yeah.
Well, and it does come down to intention, though, doesn't it? He's judging only on the results of her actions, not either by what instigated them or by what's going on in her being, right, in her soul. And when Hugo says God is more than just, one of the things he's talking about is that God looks at the heart.
Well, yeah. One of the lines that we talked about a minute ago was, there in the darkness, who can know the answer to all these questions? There's only one. He is alone. He is God.
Yep.
Right.
Which is why maybe Valjean looks at Fantine and says, the truth is you are still virginal and holy before God. Because the intention of your heart was always to take care of your child.
Yeah, a little bit. The intention of your heart, who can know it, including you? As you try to pick up this law and justify yourself, no one can justify themselves but God. And God does. Lucky you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really powerful. I'm sure he will, in the coming hundreds of pages, continue to meditate on that.
Oh, yeah, certainly he will. Well, thank you for both of your thoughts. I am eager to watch the story that I know so well play out in the next pages. We're about to get, I think, Valjean claiming his daughter, which is going to be great fun. I wonder if, and this is just sort of a thoughts to take with us into our next reading assignment, I'm concerned about whether Cosette will be a real person as a character.
Me too. Yes.
Or whether she will be a paper doll of sorts.
Well, right now she's a lark.
Right
so there's that.
Yeah.
What larks?
What larks, Pip? So that'll be interesting to find out. And I'm also really excited to watch Valjean encounter the Thénardiers and their particular brand of calloused evil. That's going to be fun and probably rather satisfying.
I will have Master of the House playing as I read that section.
It's so great to have an A-list musical to keep us company
Soundtrack.
through this reading. Well, thank all of you listeners for joining us, and we hope you'll show up next time, and also join us on Facebook and talk to us about your own thoughts as you read through this great novel. And until next time, my friends, bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.